Nobody warns you about this. Not your parents, not your closest friends, not any self-help book you have ever closed and placed on the nightstand at 2 in the morning. Nobody tells you that one of the most psychologically dangerous things a human being can do is remain visible to everyone, always, for years, without interruption, without retreat, without silence. They warn you about isolation. They pathologize withdrawal. They tell you that pulling away from people is a symptom of depression, of damage, of something broken inside you that needs to be fixed. But Carl Jung saw something different, something most people spend their entire lives never confronting. He understood that the person who never disappears, who is always reachable, always present, always performing, is often the most psychologically fractured of all. Because here is the truth nobody says out loud. Staying perpetually visible to the wrong people does not make you connected. It makes you consumed. And somewhere inside you, you already know this. You have felt it, the slow, almost imperceptible drain that begins after years of constant interaction. The moment conversations start sounding hollow. When the laughter around you feels rehearsed. When your phone buzzes and instead of reaching for it with anticipation, you feel something closer to dread. That sensation, that quiet, persistent urge to vanish, is not dysfunction. According to Jung, it may be the first genuinely honest signal your psyche has sent you in years. Most people suppress it immediately. They call it antisocial. They push through it, reply anyway, show up anyway, perform anyway. And they lose themselves, slowly, completely, without ever understanding how it happened. This is the story of what silence reveals, and why disappearing, truly, deliberately, unapologetically withdrawing, may be the most psychologically courageous act a modern human being can undertake. Drop 11. I am finally ready to hear my own mind in the comments right now. Carl Jung believed the human mind cannot hear itself clearly when surrounded by relentless noise. Not the noise of traffic or crowded rooms, but the deeper, more insidious noise of social performance. The constant hum of managing impressions, calibrating emotional availability, and maintaining the version of yourself that the people around you have come to rely upon. This noise is seductive. It feels like connection. It masquerades as relationship. But beneath the surface, something far more mechanical is operating. People do not always seek your presence because they value who you are. They often seek it because of what your presence provides them: comfort, validation, a mirror that reflects them favorably, a predictable emotional anchor they can pull toward themselves whenever they feel unsteady. And the personality you constructed to survive this, the agreeable version, the endlessly patient version, the one that always had capacity for everyone else's difficulties, becomes so practiced, so automatic, that it eventually drowns out the quieter voice underneath. The one that has opinions it never expressed, boundaries it never enforced, desires it quietly abandoned because the social cost of acknowledging them felt too steep. Jung called this the persona, the mask constructed for the world. Necessary to a degree. Every human being needs the capacity to adapt to social environments. But when the persona becomes permanent, when it stops being a tool and starts being a prison, the real self does not simply wait patiently beneath it. It begins to suffocate. So people keep performing, replying instantly, explaining themselves constantly, maintaining friendships that already died emotionally years ago. Not because they want to, because they are terrified of what silence might reveal if they ever truly stop. Because silence exposes things. It exposes which relationships depended entirely on your emotional accessibility. It exposes how many people feel connected to you only when they have uninterrupted access to your attention, your energy, your time. It exposes which bonds were built on genuine understanding and which were built on the quiet, unspoken agreement that you would continue to be whoever they needed you to be. And most uncomfortably of all, it exposes the version of yourself you became just to remain tolerated. Most people never notice how profoundly their personality has been sculpted around keeping others comfortable. The process is gradual, imperceptible. One small adjustment at a time, softening an opinion here, swallowing a frustration there, laughing at something that did not feel funny, agreeing with something that felt wrong. Until the accumulated weight of all those adjustments becomes the person they recognize in the mirror. Until they disappear for a while. And then something deeply unsettling begins to surface. The people who claim to care about you respond differently to your absence than you expected. Some become irritated almost immediately. Others grow strangely cold, withdrawn in a way that mirrors your own withdrawal, but carries a faint, punishing edge. Some become suddenly, almost frantically interested in you again, reaching out with an urgency they never demonstrated during your constant availability. This is not affection. This is not concern. This is the psychological discomfort of losing predictability. Predictable people make others feel psychologically safe. That is why society subtly, consistently rewards over-explaining, emotional openness, and constant accessibility. A person who is always reachable is easier to emotionally manage. Their reactions can be anticipated. Their responses can be relied upon. Their availability can be consumed without negotiation. The moment you become less accessible, something shifts beneath the surface of your social world. People can no longer position themselves with certainty in relation to you. And uncertainty, particularly the uncertainty of not knowing where you stand with someone who was previously always available, activates a deeply uncomfortable psychological response in those who have unconsciously depended on your consistency. Jung understood this deeply. He understood that what most people call loneliness when they withdraw is not loneliness at all. It is psychological recovery, a retreat from unconscious performance, a temporary dissolution of the false self, the version built not from authentic desire, but from accumulated social survival. Because when you surround yourself with people continuously, you gradually lose the capacity to distinguish who you genuinely are from who you became to navigate the social world without being abandoned. And the terrifying part, the part most people never reach because they never stay quiet long enough, is that this erosion happens entirely beneath the threshold of conscious awareness. You do not notice it happening. You only notice the aftermath years later, when you realize you can no longer identify what actually brings you peace, what you genuinely want, who you actually are when no one is watching and nothing is required of you. Write 444. I trust myself enough to finally stop performing in the comments below. At first, disappearing feels morally wrong. Your fingers instinctively reach for the phone. A message goes unanswered for 2 hours, and you feel a creeping guilt that is almost physical. You rehearse explanations for your absence before anyone has even requested one. You imagine people interpreting your silence as hostility, as coldness, as evidence of some fundamental flaw in your character. That reaction alone, that immediate, reflexive guilt, reveals how completely social conditioning has restructured your nervous system. Somewhere along the way, many people absorbed a belief so thoroughly it stopped feeling like a belief and began feeling like reality. That constant availability is a moral virtue. That replying quickly is evidence of love. That always being present makes you valuable. That disappearing, even briefly, even for your own psychological survival, makes you selfish. Jung believed something more disturbing hides beneath this conditioning. Most people are not afraid of losing others. They are afraid of being forgotten, of becoming irrelevant, of discovering that the relationships they invested years into maintaining were not nearly as substantial as they appeared. Sustained, in many cases, by the sheer force of their own continuous effort and the relentless willingness to be available. So they remain emotionally accessible long after it has begun quietly destroying them from the inside. They continue conversations they no longer find meaningful. They sustain friendships that drain rather than restore, that leave them more exhausted after spending time together before. They laugh among people who secretly tire them. And slowly, in the accumulation of all these small performances repeated across years, they become strangers to themselves. The most frightening dimension of prolonged social exposure is this: human beings are unconsciously adaptive creatures. Around one group, you instinctively become softer. Around another, more guarded. Around others, more entertaining, more agreeable, more silent. The adaptation is biological, social, entirely unconscious. And after enough time, you stop being able to identify which version is actually you. You only know which version keeps people comfortable, which version keeps the relationships intact, which version allows you to move through your social world without friction, without conflict, without the unbearable discomfort of being genuinely misunderstood. This is where isolation becomes genuinely, psychologically terrifying. Because when the noise falls away, there is no audience left to perform for. And without an audience, the false self begins to starve. The persona, built meticulously over years of social navigation, requires constant reinforcement. It needs to be seen, reflected, validated, maintained through interaction. Remove that interaction and it begins to dissolve. And most people, the moment they feel this dissolution beginning, run. Back to their phones, back to meaningless exchanges, back to the constant low-grade stimulation that keeps the mind occupied and prevents it from turning inward. Because silence is not peaceful in the beginning. Silence is confrontation. In silence, things become visible that were impossible to perceive through the noise. You begin noticing that certain people only reached out when they required emotional support, that some friendships were constructed almost entirely on a shared, mutual distraction from the discomfort of being alone with themselves, that you frequently violated your own boundaries, your own needs, your own sense of what felt right, simply to avoid the social consequence of disappointing someone else. Kindness without boundaries quietly teaches people how to use you. And the most disorienting dimension of this realization is that most of the people who benefited from your unlimited accessibility were not malicious. They were simply human. Human beings naturally gravitate toward emotional convenience. If you always listen, they will always unload. If you always forgive, they will continue crossing the same lines. If you always remain, they will assume you are permanent, not because they are calculating, but because humans adapt with remarkable speed to whatever is consistently available to them. That is precisely why your disappearance unsettles people more profoundly than your anger ever could. Anger still provides them with something. It keeps the engagement alive. It confirms that you still care enough to react. But silence removes all of that entirely. And it forces the people around you into an uncertainty they are not accustomed to experiencing in relation to you. Suddenly, they begin wondering, did something change? Are they pulling away? Did I do something wrong? But what truly disturbs them is not your physical absence. It is the emerging realization that your interior world, your thoughts, your attention, your emotional life may be continuing, even flourishing, without them positioned at the center of it. People frequently confuse emotional possession with genuine connection. They believe that frequent access signifies intimacy, that constant communication represents loyalty, that an immediate reply means love. But some of the most profound psychological bonds in human experience exist in silence, without performance, without maintenance, without the constant exchange of reassurance that signals the relationship is still intact. And when you disappear for a while, you begin, perhaps for the first time, to separate authentic connection from psychological dependency. That distinction changes everything, because once you have seen it clearly, you cannot unsee it. Distance does something terrifying to human perception. It removes the emotional haze that constant exposure creates. Patterns begin emerging that were concealed in plain sight the entire time. You notice who only contacted you out of restlessness or boredom, who quietly competed with you, subtly undermining your confidence while presenting a surface of genuine support. And most disturbingly, you begin noticing with uncomfortable precision how frequently people punished you emotionally the moment you stopped behaving in the way they had come to expect. Not openly, not with honest communication. Psychologically, a drop in warmth, delayed responses carrying a faint edge, passive aggression cloaked in humor, subtle emotional unavailability deployed with precision to remind you that deviation from their expectations carries a cost. The human mind is extraordinarily sensitive to shifts in relational control. When someone becomes less accessible, less readable, less emotionally predictable, the people most accustomed to that person's consistency feel it immediately, not as a conscious observation, but as a visceral discomfort they cannot fully articulate. Their emotional stability, without their awareness, was partially constructed on the foundation of your predictability. And when that foundation begins to shift, the entire structure above it trembles. Drop 777. I am releasing every version of myself that was built for someone else's comfort in the comments. Jung understood that much of human interaction operates beneath the threshold of consciousness. People rarely have accurate insight into the true motivations behind their emotional reactions. They experience the reaction, the irritation, the sudden coldness, the inexplicable sense of threat, without understanding what produced it. That is why some individuals become disproportionately unsettled when you begin protecting your own psychological space. Your boundaries do not just affect them externally, they force them into an internal confrontation they were actively avoiding, through you. The friend who has organized their sense of importance around being constantly needed. The person who relies on your attention to escape the discomfort of their own interior silence. The one who has mistaken emotional dependency for closeness because authentic intimacy, the kind that requires genuine vulnerability, has always felt too dangerous. Your silence exposes all of it, with a precision that words could never achieve, because silence has a particular way of surfacing truths that language was actively concealing. Sometimes you realize, slowly, then all at once, that the people around you never truly knew you. They knew the version of you that was endlessly available, the version that tolerated everything, the version that consistently sacrificed internal equilibrium to maintain external harmony, the version that absorbed rather than expressed, that accommodated rather than asserted. Once that version disappears, relationships begin malfunctioning, because many social bonds are quietly, almost invisibly, constructed on roles rather than authentic understanding. One person inhabits the role of the therapist, always available to absorb and process the emotional weight of others. One plays the entertainer, responsible for keeping energy elevated and atmosphere pleasant. One plays the emotional caretaker, whose function is to sense and respond to the needs of everyone in the room before those needs are even articulated. And the moment someone stops performing their assigned role, people become uncomfortable in a way they cannot quite name, almost offended, as though individuality itself, the simple act of no longer being who they needed you to be, constitutes a form of betrayal. Most relationships do not end when respect dissolves. They end when awareness arrives. Because awareness transforms your tolerance. You stop romanticizing emotional imbalance. Stop rationalizing manipulative patterns. Stop investing energy in people who only recognize your value when you are easy to access. And strangely, paradoxically, the more genuinely comfortable you become with solitude, the more clearly you begin to perceive human nature. Not through bitterness, not through suspicion, through a kind of calm, detached understanding that was impossible to access while you were still submerged in the noise. You begin recognizing that many people are not emotionally connected to others in the way they believe themselves to be. They are connected through unconscious need, through the specific psychological functions other people serve for them. Validation, attention, security, distraction from the discomfort of being alone with their own thoughts. Once you perceive this clearly, ordinary conversations begin carrying an almost surreal quality, because beneath the surface of casual interaction, you start sensing the invisible psychological negotiations constantly in motion between people. Who is seeking approval? Who is maneuvering for dominance? Who fears abandonment and disguises that fear as indifference? Who harbors quiet resentment beneath a surface of warmth and accommodation? Most people never perceive these things because they never remain still and silent long enough to observe them. You begin understanding how thoroughly modern life is structured to keep people psychologically occupied at all times. Constant messages, constant updates, constant stimulation. An unrelenting stream of noise preventing anyone from sitting alone long enough to confront what waits beneath the surface. And that confrontation is precisely what Jung believed most people spend the entirety of their lives evading. Because beneath the social personality, beneath the carefully maintained image, beneath the performance that has become so practiced it feels like identity, something far less comfortable waits. The shadow. Not evil, not darkness in any dramatic sense, simply rejected. The fragments of yourself you learned to bury in order to remain accepted. Your anger, your fierce ambition, your quiet envy, your exhaustion, your desire to simply vanish from everyone and everything without the obligation of an explanation. These are not pathological impulses. They are the most honest parts of the self. And they were buried not because they were wrong, but because the social world required their absence as the price of belonging. Suppression does not erase anything psychologically. It reroutes it, drives it deeper into the unconscious, where it continues operating without your awareness, shaping behavior, generating reactions you cannot trace to their source. This is why people who have spent years being agreeable suddenly fracture without warning. Why individuals become emotionally numb without being able to identify when or how the numbness began. Why someone wakes up one morning feeling profoundly disconnected from a life they constructed with considerable effort and intention. The shadow was ignored too long, and silence forces you to meet it. This is the stage where disappearing becomes genuinely, uncomfortably transformative. Because eventually, there is no one left to redirect your attention toward. No distractions, no ambient noise of relationship maintenance and social performance, no constant conversations filling the space where your own thoughts would otherwise emerge. Only you and the parts of yourself you have spent years carefully avoiding. You begin noticing with uncomfortable clarity how frequently your kindness was driven not by genuine generosity, but by fear. Fear of disapproval, of conflict, of being perceived as cold or selfish. How many of your relationships were sustained not by authentic affection, but by guilt? How much of your personality, the patient version, the agreeable version, was constructed not from who you are, but from who the people around you needed you to be? But deep solitude often reveals something more difficult. Large portions of what felt like personality were adaptations. Social survival strategies rehearsed so consistently for so long that they stopped feeling like strategies and began feeling like self. The endlessly patient version, the emotionally available version, the one who could always find a way to stay, to forgive, to absorb, to remain. Masks, functional masks, but masks nonetheless. And once you become genuinely conscious of them, social interaction changes in ways that cannot be undone. You begin perceiving the subtle manipulation concealed within ordinary conversations, people testing boundaries to locate their edges, seeking reassurance through indirect means, working, without knowing they are working, to maintain emotional control over how they are perceived and how they are responded to. Jung cautioned that people who perceive darkness only in others remain unconscious of their own shadow. True psychological awareness does not begin when you see the patterns in those around you. It begins when you recognize the same patterns operating within yourself. The hunger for validation, the desire to be admired, to be missed, to be valued. The quiet satisfaction when someone who ignored you suddenly notices your absence. None of this makes you broken. It makes you human. Genuinely, honestly human. Rather than the curated, carefully managed version most people present to the world and to themselves. Jung believed that until a person becomes conscious of their unconscious patterns, those patterns will govern their life entirely, and they will experience that governance not as compulsion, but as fate. This is precisely what occurs in most human relationships. Emotional cycles repeating across years, across decades, across entirely different people and contexts, because the underlying pattern was never examined. The one who perpetually pursues emotionally unavailable people, the one who confuses being needed with being loved, the one who continues sacrificing themselves in relationship after relationship, convinced that if they give enough, long enough, the loyalty they have been offering will eventually be reciprocated. Patterns, not destiny. And solitude exposes these patterns with a directness that is almost brutal. Because when you withdraw from everyone for a period of genuine duration, withdrawal symptoms emerge. You reach for your phone without any specific purpose. You find yourself imagining conversations that never occurred. You wonder who has noticed your absence. And this is when you recognize something that may be the most important insight of the entire process. Constant communication was not always connection. Sometimes it was dependency, a loop of emotional stimulation sustaining the mind and keeping the deeper discomfort at bay. This is why genuine solitude feels unbearable to so many people. In silence, there are no external interruptions shielding you from the contents of your own mind. No validation, no performance, no audience. Only the awareness that you have perhaps been running for a very long time from a confrontation that has been waiting patiently at the center of yourself. Comment 333. I am whole. I am complete. I am finally free to become myself, in the comments below. Eventually, you return. Not dramatically, without announcement. Most people will not register the exact moment it happens, but you will notice it, because something inside you no longer moves in the way it used to. The old hunger for constant validation has quieted. The compulsion to have every message answered immediately has loosened its grip. The sense of responsibility for maintaining every relationship, regardless of what it costs you, has begun to lift. And for the first time, perhaps, you understand the distinction between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness is the pain of being invisible to others. Solitude is the profound, almost sacred peace of finally being visible to yourself. Most people never arrive at that distinction. They spend their lives running from silence because silence removes the witnesses their identity depends upon. Without the constant reflection of other people's attention, they no longer know who they are. Remove the audience and the performance stops, and with it, the only sense of self they have ever known. When access disappears, reality surfaces. The people who only reached out when they needed emotional labor quietly cease to reach out. The ones who claimed connection but maintained it only through the convenience of your constant availability gradually stop making the effort genuine connection actually requires. And the ones who truly valued you, not the accessible version, not the functional version, not the version that served a particular psychological purpose, they remain, quietly, without demanding performance as the price of their regard. That recognition reorganizes the architecture of your relationships permanently. You become more deliberate, not from ego, from the clarity that comes when you have finally seen how many of your interactions were organized around unconscious emotional exchange rather than genuine understanding. You begin recognizing that some people love the sensation of access more than they love the person they are accessing. That many people who tell you they miss you are not missing you. They are missing the feeling your presence produced in them, the security, the confirmation of their own significance, the specific emotional function you performed in their lives. There is a difference, a painful one to recognize, but an important one. Carl Jung believed the great privilege of a human life is becoming who you truly are. What most people fail to understand is how psychologically demanding, how almost violent that process genuinely is. Because becoming yourself requires dismantling the versions of yourself that were constructed to keep others comfortable. The agreeable version, the infinitely patient version, the version terrified of disappointing anyone, of being misunderstood, of being left. Not everyone will be comfortable